my background is a business school, I minored in economics. I learned a lot of advanced sort of analytic techniques, and then you go to law school and you don't use them anymore. And I've wondered for a long time why it is that why it is that lawyers don't really use advanced math and economics techniques in their practice.
You could be cynical.
I could be cynical. About a year and a half ago, I listened to this TED Talk by a guy named Dan Ariely, who's a behavioral economist, and he was talking about cheating. And it was a fascinating talk, and it had a lot of application to my work as a bankruptcy trustee because, people cheat in bankruptcy. And we had to figure out why. That's a big question mark for us. So this was a fascinating talk about it, and I started doing more research into behavioral economics, the studies regarding cheating, and it really was fascinating. But that got me into some of the other things in behavioral economics that are applicable mostly to dispute resolution and mediation, and negotiations especially. And then that gets you into game theory, because when you start really studying behavioral economics, it drags you into game theory techniques, and that was a whole other thing. And then I started, researching this stuff. And what I found is that there's actually a movement going on now, really at the cusp of becoming big, of doing data analysis and applying it to legal concepts. A couple of companies that are out there now that are selling products are being used by lawyers. One of them, for example, is Lex Machina. And this is just purchased by Lexis, big provider of legal services, at the end of last year. And what Lex Machina does is it takes data analytic tools and applies them to litigation situations, mostly in intellectual property. So, for example, if you're an intellectual property litigator and you want to find out how your opponent behaves, Lex Machina will actually go in, pull all the cases that involve that lawyer, perform analytic techniques on them to find out exactly, by the numbers, what that other lawyer does. And that can help you set strategy. And they can do the same thing through the case law. They can do the same thing through the judges and so forth. So it's an extremely powerful tool. Another great example is something called Ross Intelligence. And Ross Intelligence is actually a artificial intelligence research assistant that is powered by IBM Watson. And a couple of weeks ago, it's actually sponsored by a firm called Dentons. It's a huge international firm. And about 2 weeks ago, they announced that Baker and Hofstetler was the first big law firm to sign a licensing deal with them. Again, they focus mostly on bankruptcy work. And just this last Friday, they announced that Latham & Watkins had signed on as a licensee. So you've got 3 really big bankruptcy shops that are now using this technology to do legal research. And one of the really interesting things about behavioral economics is you can start to go to the studies and look at, not only use the studies to structure exactly what you're doing, but you can start to model the numbers to figure out, if I do X, Y, and Z, what's my expectation as to how much I reduce the risk that somebody does something that they shouldn't. In negotiations is tremendously interesting. For example, I think most lawyers know that you start off with a really high number if you want to get people up high, and it gets them thinking about high numbers. Turns out that that's, in behavioral economic terms, a concept called anchoring. And what most lawyers don't know is that you can have the same effect without using the actual negotiation numbers. So, for example, you could be talking about football scores or baseball scores and many other things. And by exposing the other party to numbers in the range where you want them to be, you can actually affect their negotiation behavior.